amazing. God commanded one person intimate with me to speak up. And in the same situation, God had instructed me not to speak at all. So in both of our lives, conflicting commands from the same God has instructed us to do different things. And it's amazing that in Christianity and Islam, you have these experts, these so-called passionate people who quote from their Bible or the Quran of their prophet or prophets, and they have the ability, by quoting these scriptures and tying them all together, of what God's plan is for all humanity. It's amazing. As the heavens are above the earth, so are God's ways above ours. But these scholars, these immense scholars that can quote scriptures from both the Quran and the Bible, are telling people that they can deduct what God's plans are, not only for them, but for every person on the planet, based on what God spoke to a single or to many prophets. Since God has revealed his mind through his voice to these prophets, how are men deducting his mind through reading a book or reading what he spoke to other men about? It's amazing. And then Satan has them both fighting, both factions fighting, both Christianity and Muslims from Islam fighting each other on which interpretation is the best, when they both yield zero results. And they don't have any results. They tell their followers, just wait, it's coming, or you'll get it in heaven. But for right now, you're on your own, because what I'm telling you as interpreters or scholars are for God has intended for all humanity, when that has never, ever happened in the history of the planet. The Prophet of Islam in the Muslim realm has not received his instruction from Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. He received his instruction from God Almighty. And so have the prophets in the Bible. We're not debating that. It doesn't really matter too much to you or to me what God spoke to other people. Just like if your boss had something to say to a co-worker, it has nothing to do with you. And what God spoke to Moses or Noah or Abraham or a prophet in the Quran or any prophet has nothing to do with me, because he wasn't talking to me. How can I be liable for what God has spoken to another? Never happened, never will. But yet you have these scholars that can quote from the Quran and the Bible simultaneously, telling you they know that their interpretation is what God has for all humanity. And the heavens are above the earth. So is God's mind above ours. It's impossible to think like God unless he talks to you. There's no other way to do it. How did your prophet in the Quran receive his instructions? He didn't deduct what God spoke to Moses or Abraham, Isaac or Jacob, right? He heard the voice of God and he obeyed. And so did the prophets in the Bible. Not one instance did any man ever deem himself as a prophet by interpreting what God spoke to another. He had his own personal relationship. Like I said, God spoke to somebody that I know intimately to speak up. He, in fact, in that situation, told me not to speak up. And only when I obeyed him in a vision, in a godly vision, not given to me by interpretation of these so-called scholars, that the best they can do is tell you to wait because there's no results, God revealed to me to button my mouth. And in buttoning my mouth and spoke to me. Actually, I heard the voice of God, woke me up. I turned around like there's somebody else in the room that had wakened me from my sleep. But that's what God does when he speaks to each one of us. Not through the interpretation of these scholars that the best they can do is the reward is later. And God's reward is now. Delivers us from our own thinking that leads us to death and destruction. Not as a template for God doesn't speak to me as a template for all the world. never reveal themselves to a prophet as his template in that person's words to reveal what his plan was for the world. God speaks to each one of us individually. Don't let anybody tell you differently.